billion people. That is the current scale of humanity. We cover every continent, build towering megacities, and believe we are the absolute dominant species of this planet. This crowding creates a false sense of security. We look at the endless streams of people on the streets and believe that the species Homo sapiens is immortal, an unstoppable force of nature. But biology does not know how to lie. And the truth hidden within each of our DNA is telling a completely different story. In reality, humans are one of the creatures with the lowest genetic diversity on Earth. Take two chimpanzees at random from the same forest in Central Africa. The difference in their genetic codes is greater than the difference between any two humans on this planet, even if one is standing in New York and the other is in the middle of the Mongolian steppe. Even a troop of chimpanzees consisting of only 50 individuals contains a richer amount of genetic variation than all 8 billion of us combined. Biologically speaking, we are like clones of each other. We are an inbred population on a global scale. Why does this paradox exist? Why does a dominant species possess such a fragile and uniform genome? The answer lies in a deep scar within geological history. Data from mitochondrial DNA has exposed a truth that archaeology has suspected for decades. The human population once collapsed. Around 74,000 years ago, the number was not in the billions, nor even millions. Across the entire surface of the Earth at that time, only about 1,000 to 10,000 breeding pairs remained. All of humanity, all the hope, future, and potential of our species was then only enough to fill one corner of a stadium's stands. We are not a great river flowing throughout history. We are a small trickle of water leaking from a dam that has been blocked. This phenomenon is scientifically named genetic bottleneck. And the enemy that backed humanity into that dead corner was not an asteroid, nor was it aliens. That enemy came from right beneath our feet. To truly understand the scale of the impending disaster, we need to look back at the world in its final moments of peace. Earth around 75,000 years ago was not a desolate planet waiting for humans to explore. On the contrary, it was a crowded and highly competitive world among human species. An era where Homo sapiens was not the sole ruler, and certainly not yet the strongest. Across the Eurasian continent, our brothers were dominating vast territories they had adapted to over hundreds of thousands of years. In the frigid north, the Neanderthals, brawny hunters with brains even larger than ours, were masters of Europe. They mastered fire, hunted mammoths with brutal ambush tactics, and had begun to have primitive burial rituals. Deep inside caves in the Altai Mountains and Tibet, the mysterious Denisovans were thriving, possessing a genome that helped them survive at altitudes where the air is so thin it's hard to breathe. And in tropical Southeast Asia, Homo erectus, the most successful human species in history with 2 million years of existence, was still maintaining its last populations on the island of Java. Alongside them were the hobbits, Homo floresiensis on Flores Island and Homo luzernensis in the Philippines. Meanwhile, our direct ancestors, Homo sapiens, were still largely confined to the cradle of Africa. But they were not standing still. Archaeological evidence at Blombos Cave, South Africa, shows that by this time, sapiens' thinking had reached a turning point. They didn't just know how to sharpen stones. They began to know how to paint on walls with red clay, ochre, and how to string shells together for jewelry. Abstract thought and complex language were taking shape. they were on the threshold of a civilizational explosion. Small groups began making exploratory migrations out of Africa across the Arabian Peninsula, seeking new promised lands. They believed that the future was wide open. Little did they know that all those evolutionary efforts, all those early civilizations, were about to be placed on the scales of death. The epicenter of destruction lay more than 7,000 kilometers from Africa, on Sumatra Island in present-day Indonesia. Today, Lake Toba is a tourist attraction with calm, crystal blue waters like a mirror, perfectly concealing the monster sleeping beneath. Geologically, Toba is not a conical volcano like Fuji or Etna that we usually see. It is a supervolcano, a freak geological formation that, when it erupts, does not create a mountain, but rather giant calderas that swallow the Earth's surface. Beneath the soil of Sumatra lies the deadly intersection of two tectonic plates, the Indo-Australian plate sliding under the Eurasian plate at a rate of several centimeters per year. The horrific friction at this depth melts rock, forming a massive reservoir of liquid magma. But instead of erupting gradually through vents to release pressure, the geological structure at Toba acted like a pressure cooker lid that was completely welded shut. For hundreds of thousands of years, this magma chamber continued to swell, accumulating trillions of tons of molten rock and compressed gas. It grew so large that it lifted the entire island of Sumatra, creating a geological dome bulging like a balloon about to burst. In the final years leading up to the disaster, warning signs would have surely appeared. Groundwater boiled. Sulfur gases escaping from fissures killed off vegetation. Continuous tremors ensured the ground was never still. Sensitive animals in Southeast Asia, from elephants and tigers to troops of monkeys, likely sensed the unrest from deep underground and began to migrate. But for the Homo erectus living in nearby Java, or the Homo sapiens further away, they were completely oblivious to the planet's inner workings. They had no seismographs to know that beneath their feet lay a time bomb with a destructive power greater than the entire nuclear arsenal of modern humanity combined. They continued to hunt, to gather, and to look up at the clear blue sky, unaware that these were the final days they would see the sun in its full glory. Underground pressure had reached a physical breaking point. The rock could endure no more. And on a fateful morning approximately 74,000 years ago, the lid of hell was officially blown open. The event began not with an explosion, but with a collapse. When the pressure below exceeded the structural limits of the granite crust, the dome of the magma chamber caved in. Billions of tons of earth and rock plummeted into the boiling lava pool, creating a massive piston effect that propelled the molten matter high into the sky. That was the Toba eruption, the greatest volcanic event on this planet in the last 25 million years. To visualize the scale of this monster, let us make a chilling comparison. The eruption of Krakatoa in 1883 destroyed the island, produced the loudest sound in modern history, and killed 36,000 people. But compared to Toba, Krakatoa was merely a firecracker. Geologists estimate that the Toba eruption released energy equivalent to 1 gigaton of TNT. This figure is approximately 3,000 times greater than the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens. Or more terrifyingly, it was tens of thousands of times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. This was no longer a common geological event. This was destruction on a planetary scale. In the opening moments, a plume of ash and hot gas shot straight into the stratosphere, reaching an altitude of nearly 50 kilometers, the edge of outer space. But the true death came from the ground. The explosion generated pyroclastic flows, a mixture of toxic gases, ash, and molten rock traveling at speeds of up to 700 kilometers per hour. The temperature inside these flows reached 1,000 degrees Celsius. It swept across the island of Sumatra, crossed the Strait of Malacca, and spread as far as Malaysia. Any living creature, be it tiger, elephant, rhinoceros, or groups of Homo erectus living within a radius of hundreds of kilometers, had no chance of escape. They were not buried. They were instantly vaporized. Extreme temperatures turned the water in living organisms' bodies into steam immediately, tearing apart soft tissues and incinerating bones into ash in an instant. The entire Southeast Asian tropical ecosystem was wiped out within a few hours. The sound of the explosion was a lethal weapon in the literal sense. Acoustic simulations show that Toba's roar was so loud it tore the eardrums of any creature within a radius of several hundred miles. In India, 3,000 kilometers away, the explosion was still heard like thunder tearing through the sky. Furthermore, infrasound waves from the explosion traveled around the Earth multiple times, shaking even distant lands in Africa where our ancestors lived. They might not have heard the explosion clearly, but they certainly felt the ground beneath their feet trembling, as if the gods were angry. But the physical destruction was only the prelude. The most terrifying thing was what Toba threw into the atmosphere. Approximately 2,800 cubic kilometers of rock and ash were blasted into the air. To visualize, this amount of material would be enough to bury the entire United States under a layer of ash 30 centimeters thick. Stratospheric winds quickly carried this death cloud around the world. In India, archaeologists today find layers of Toba ash, young Toba tuff, up to 6 meters thick. Imagine a vast land like the Indian subcontinent buried under 6 meters of hot ash. Every water source was poisoned. Every piece of vegetation was buried. Ancient human populations living in India at that time, possibly Homo heidelbergensis or pioneering groups of Homo sapiens, faced a true apocalypse. Archaeology at the Jwalapuram site, India, shows stone tools located immediately below and above the ash layer, proving survival, but the price paid was total habitat destruction. Within a few weeks, skies across the entire Earth began to change. The massive ash cloud containing billions of tons of sulfur dioxide reacted with water vapor, forming veils of sulfuric acid that covered the planet. The sun, Earth's only source of life, began to fade. Daytime turned into eternal twilight. The moon disappeared at night. The sky turned a murky, deep red of blood and ash. Toba didn't just destroy an island, it turned off the light switch for the entire world. And when the light went out, the cold arrived. After the sky-tearing geological roar came a prolonged silence. But it was not peace. It was the silence of death gradually seeping into every fiber of the planet. The billions of tons of ash and sulfur dioxide that Toba threw into the stratosphere did not disappear. They did not fall back down immediately. At altitudes where rain could not reach, the sulfur gas began to react chemically with water vapor, forming billions upon billions of suspended sulfuric acid droplets. These aerosol particles bonded together, forming a massive reflective veil that enveloped the entire Earth. This veil acted like a mirror of death. It allowed heat from the Earth to escape into space, yet reflected sunlight back away, preventing warmth from reaching the ground. The result was an immediate and devastating climate catastrophe that science calls volcanic winter. data from ancient ice cores drilled deep beneath Greenland and Antarctica show that global average temperatures dropped abruptly by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius in just a few months. This number might sound small, but within Earth's complex climate system, it was a total collapse. For comparison, the Little Ice Age in medieval times required a temperature drop of less than 1 degree Celsius to freeze the Thames River in London and cause famine throughout Europe. With Toba's 5-degree drop, the consequences were many times more catastrophic. At high latitudes like Europe and North Asia, summer temperatures plummeted by as much as 15 degrees Celsius. The concept of summer disappeared completely from nature's calendar. Heavy snow fell right in the middle of July. Permanently frozen rivers. Neanderthals in Europe, masters of enduring the cold, also faced an unprecedented survival challenge as their prey herds froze to death right on the white snowy fields. But the cold and frost were not the most efficient killers. The real killer, which throttled life at the cellular level, was the darkness. As the amount of sunlight reaching the surface plummeted, photosynthesis, the most fundamental energy maintenance mechanism of the biosphere, came to a standstill. Global vegetation began to collapse. This was not seasonal leaf shedding. This was the starvation of plants. Tropical jungles withered and grasslands turned into patches of dry, burnt stubble. This collapse rippled along the food chain with the speed of falling dominoes. Without fresh greenery, giant herbivores, megafauna, such as mammoths, deer, and bison, began to die of starvation en masse. They wandered across grey lands, gnawing on barren trunks before collapsing from exhaustion. Their carcasses lay scattered, unable to decompose due to the freezing temperatures, becoming frozen statues of a lost, glorious era. And as the prey disappeared, the top predators of the food chain, including Homo sapiens, fell into extreme misery. In Africa, the homeland and last stronghold of Homo sapiens, the impact of Toba did not manifest as blizzards, but as a more brutal form. Mega drought. As global ocean temperatures plummeted, the amount of water evaporating from the sea dropped severely. Earth's water cycle was broken. The tropical rains that nourished the dark continent disappeared completely. The monsoons stopped blowing. The water-bearing clouds never arrived. Geological evidence from sediment cores at the bottom of Lake Malawi in East Africa shows that lake levels during this period dropped to record lows, in some places by as much as 500 meters. The giant freshwater lake, a life source for countless creatures, was fragmented into stagnant, salty, and toxin-filled puddles. The Congo rainforest shrank into small, isolated patches. Green savannas turned into red dust deserts. The African ecosystem, the cradle that had nurtured and protected humanity for hundreds of thousands of years, now turned its back on its children. For the groups of Homo sapiens living at that time, their world had literally collapsed. They had no concept of volcanoes, plate tectonics, or climatology. In their eyes, the gods had become angry and abandoned humanity. The sun, the supreme deity and giver of life, had become weak, sickly, and obscured by a terrifying, thick, reddish haze. Clean water sources vanished, replaced by murky puddles contaminated with ash and acid from toxic rains. Food became extremely scarce. Hunting trips increasingly returned empty-handed. Large tribes began to disintegrate. Early social structures broke down. The elderly and children, the weakest links, were the first to fall. Immune systems weakened by hunger caused disease outbreaks among groups huddling together in cold caves. The competition for survival became more brutal and naked than ever. No more sharing, no more compassion. Amidst frantic hunger, humans were forced to face the most horrifying moral choices to survive. Across the African continent, silence enveloped the villages and hunting camps that were once bustling with laughter. The human population began a vertical freefall. Our biological graph plunged straight into the abyss, nearing zero. The bottleneck began to tighten, preparing to choke the last breaths of humanity. Look at this number. It is not just a statistic. It is the boundary between existence and nothingness. According to the most complex genetic calculation models, at the peak of the disaster, the total number of Homo sapiens on the entire planet dropped to the lowest level in history. The most pessimistic estimates suggest that only about 1,000 to 3,000 breeding pairs remained. Some more optimistic models give a figure of 10,000 individuals. But whatever the number, the truth remains incredibly cruel. The entire human population at that time, everyone carrying the potential to build the pyramids, write the theory of relativity, or set foot on the moon, was only enough to fill a large village. If you placed the entire human race at that time onto a modern cruise ship, the ship would still have empty seats. We had officially fallen onto the list of critically endangered species. Biologically, there were fewer of us than there are black rhinos or pandas in the wild today. What happens when a biological population is shrunk to such an extreme level? Science calls it genetic drift. Imagine the human genome before the disaster as a vast library with millions of different books representing a wealth of adaptations. Disease-resistant genes, heat-tolerant genes, strength genes. But when death swept through, that library was set ablaze. Thousands of precious genetic variants vanished forever simply because the individuals carrying them died before they could reproduce. The survivors were not necessarily the most superior. Sometimes they were simply the luckiest. And because their numbers were so small, they were forced to do what nature usually forbids: inbreeding. Not by choice, but because there was no one else left. Tiny groups, isolated by desert and ash, were forced to mate with close relatives to sustain the lineage. Consequently, our genome became homogenized. Diversity was wiped out. That is why today, you can transplant an organ from someone in Asia to someone in Africa with a high success rate. That biological similarity is the permanent scar that Toba left in our blood. But genetics is just numbers on paper. The reality of survival beyond those numbers was far more horrific. The lives of the survivors during this bottleneck period were a nightmare lasting thousands of years. Archaeological evidence shows a severe cultural rupture. Many tool-making techniques vanished. Trade routes were severed. The world shrunk until it was no larger than the range of the naked eye. Every day, waking up was a life-and-death struggle against hunger. When the large animals died out, humans were forced to eat anything they could chew. Dry roots, insects, the carrion of diseased animals, and even, although archaeology rarely confirms it directly, under such extreme conditions, cannibalism was a ghost that constantly loomed. When moral boundaries were blurred by the instinct for survival, one's own kind was family, but also a potential final source of protein. Isolation bred fear. Small, isolated groups became extremely wary of strangers. Meeting another group was no longer an opportunity for exchange, but a potential threat in the competition for scarce food and water. Intertribal wars, brutal and bloody, likely broke out to seize warm caves or coastal areas where life still flickered. In the darkness of the volcanic winter, Compassion was a luxury they could not afford. However, it was within this purgatory that a cruel evolutionary miracle took place. Toba acted as the most brutal of biological filters. Those who were physically weak perished. Those who were less intelligent, who did not know how to find new food sources, perished. Groups that failed to coordinate or share warmth perished. Who remained? Only the most intelligent, the most adaptable, the most creative. The pressure of natural selection weighed heavily upon the Homo sapiens' brain. To survive without large animals, they were forced to invent traps to catch small game. To survive without plant roots, they were forced to find ways to harvest seafood. To survive in the freezing cold, they were forced to improve clothing and fire. The bottleneck killed most of humanity, but it inadvertently forged the survivors into an upgraded version, smarter, more highly socialized, and more resilient than any other creature on the planet. From the ashes of doom, a new human species, more elite and dangerous, is preparing to rise. When the African continent turned into an arid deadland, when the vast savannas fell silent due to the absence of life, the last groups of survivors were pushed back to the water's edge. They had no way back. Behind them were desert and ash. Before them was the vast, cold ocean. It was at this dead end, specifically the coast of present-day South Africa, at sites like Pinnacle Point or Blombos Cave, that the miracle of revival began. The sea, though fierce, became humanity's greatest savior. While land animals died out, the ocean still provided an endless and stable source of protein: seafood. Instead of hunting elephants or wild buffalo, survivors began learning how to gather clams, snails, mussels, and catch fish in shallow waters when the tide receded. This was not just a change in menu. This was a biological turning point. Modern nutritional science tells us that seafood is rich in omega-3 fatty acids and essential nutrients for brain development. During thousands of years of isolation on the coast, the consumption of large amounts of this brain food, combined with the pressure to solve complex survival problems, stimulated the Homo sapiens brain to develop in a new direction. We didn't get bigger, we didn't get stronger, but we became many times sharper. At Pinnacle Point, archaeologists found evidence that left them stunned. The humans who survived the Toba catastrophe possessed technologies tens of thousands of years ahead of their time. They didn't just smash stones randomly. They knew how to use heat treatment. They buried silkcrete stones under sand and lit fires above to heat the stones to a precise temperature, changing the molecular structure to make the stones easier to flake and sharper. This was humanity's first materials technology technique. From these stones, they created small blades, microliths, to attach to the ends of sticks, forming projectile weapons, spears, and possibly early bows and arrows. This change was revolutionary. Humans could now kill prey or enemies from a distance, minimizing the risk of casualties. We transformed from reckless predators into tactical killers. But the deadliest weapon was not the spear. It was social bonding. In these caves, researchers found carefully ground blocks of red clay, ochre, engraved with abstract geometric patterns. These were not tools. They were art. They were symbols. For the first time in history, humans began to think about themselves, about beauty, and about us. Complex language was born as an inevitable consequence to convey these abstract notions. The isolation of the bottleneck forced individuals to communicate more deeply and coordinate more closely to protect their meager resources. Fragmented, loose tribes vanished. In their place were communities bound by blood, language, and a shared culture. The bottleneck unintentionally filtered out impurities, leaving behind the most solid and sharpest Homo sapiens crystal. Thousands of years passed. Earth's atmosphere gradually recovered. The rain returned. Lush greenery covered the volcanic scars. The human population, from a few thousand breeding pairs, began to explode thanks to abundant food sources and superior technology. And they did not stay one place. About 60,000 years ago, the gateway out of Africa opened once again. But this time, those who stepped out were no longer the timid wanderers their ancestors had been before the disaster. They were warriors, inventors, and conquerors forged through hell. They brought with them language, projectile weapons, fire, and a uniform yet resilient genome. They flooded into the Middle East, swept across Asia, and advanced into Europe. They encountered Neanderthals and Denisovans, human species that had weakened after the climate disaster and lacked the social technological explosion of sapiens. The outcome of that encounter had been decided in advance. Within a few short millennia, other human species vanished one by one from the fossil record. Earth now had only one soul master left. Those who nearly starved in caves years ago had now become the kings of the planet. The Great Revival was complete. 74,000 years ago, the Toba fire nearly wiped out humanity, leaving only a few thousand survivors. We, the 8 billion people of today, are all descendants of that small, resilient group. This genetic scar is an eternal reminder of human fragility in the face of nature. Earth does not need us, but our ancestors fought until their last breath to claim the right to exist. We are the children born from disaster. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue decoding the darkest mysteries of evolutionary history.